You're listening to Seminary Dropout, episode 33. Welcome to Seminary Dropout, the weekly podcast. That's right. Used to be every other week, starting now, today, April 21st, 2014, or whenever you happen to be listening to this in the future. Seminary Dropout is weekly. This is huge for us. We've ever since we started in November of 2012, we've been every other week. We're going weekly now. This will do a lot of amazing stuff. It'll get our listener count up because there'll be twice as many episodes. And so we're hoping to break the iTunes top 200. Listen, if you ever got some time, go to iTunes, look under Christianity, under podcasts, look at the top 200 podcasts. Look, I don't want to disparage anybody, but you won't believe who made the top 200 and Seminary Dropout hasn't. So my guess is it's probably because those are weekly podcasts and this one hasn't been. So this one's weekly now. And listen, I'm going to take this time to thank Elizabeth Armstrong, my good friend who listens to Seminary Dropout when she goes to seminary, when she commutes. Now, Elizabeth, you can listen weekly. All right. That's why we do this. Listen, I'm going to do some things that I usually do at the end of the podcast now because I've got a long interview ahead. And it's sometimes I have long interviews, but I edit them down to about the 45-minute range. There was nothing I could edit down because everything was so good. My guest today is just amazing, and her book is amazing. We'll get to that later. So just in the front of things, I want to remind you, you can support Seminary Dropout. This is more important now that we're going weekly. You can do that by going to shaneblackshear.com or seminarydropout.com, clicking on the support tab, and you can donate. Remember, you can also buy a very handsome Seminary Dropout t-shirt if you're interested in that. Email me. The other thing that you can do is rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes. We talked about that getting in the top 200. Nobody exactly knows how iTunes calculates that, but a big part of it is going to be the subscribers. So even if you listen some other way, it'd be a huge help if you go to iTunes, go to Seminary Dropout, and click subscribe, even if you never plan to listen that way, because it'll get us into that top 200. The other thing that you can do is rate and review on iTunes. I want to thank Camikins with a Z, Camikins, and FN Farmy, FNFARMY, for leaving just incredibly wonderful reviews. It was so humbling to read those. So thank you both so much. So if you would take some time to do that. And now on the first ever weekly Seminary Dropout podcast, welcome my guest. Chances are you've seen or read something by blogger and author Elizabeth Esther. You may have read her guest post on Rachel Held Evans' blog or a post on her own blog at elizabethester.com. You may have also seen her on Fox News or Anderson Cooper Live. Elizabeth is joining me today to talk about her first book, the newly released Girl at the End of the World. In it, Elizabeth tells her amazing story about her life growing up in a cult, and her exceptional abilities as a writer don't hurt either. Elizabeth, thanks so much for joining me on Seminary Dropout today.
Thank you for having me.
Elizabeth, nowadays the conservative church has kind of become a scapegoat for a lot of things, and many times rightfully so. But what you experienced was worlds beyond that, way beyond the average conservative church down the street, and definitely into cult territory. So for those who haven't read the book yet, just if you would just describe the type of the brand of fundamentalism that you came from.
So it was, our doctrine was very similar to like Southern Baptists, but we practiced, it started in my grandfather's living room. It started during the Jesus movement here in Southern California in the late 60s and early 70s. And it just started as a simple Bible study in his living room. And a bunch of my dad's high school friends, came, and then more people started coming. And eventually it just it outgrew the house. So, it started out very organically and sort of as a grassroots organization, and not even organized, just very, just wanting it to be all about Jesus. And wanting to do something beautiful for God at the time. So, it started out like that. But it just eventually became very legalistic and very rigid and very, and we also had a lot of like end times prophecy stuff going on. And that sort of combination just eventually just went unchecked and grew into this very oppressive and scary thing.
What do you think prompted your grandfather to start these Bible studies? What was the genesis of that for him?
Mm-hmm. The way he told it was he believed that mainstream Christianity had been corrupted by worldliness. Either it had let the world creep in and corrupt like the true form of Christianity, which was being, pure disciples for Jesus Christ and sharing, the gospel. Or it had become stilted and dry and dead by organized religion, and had, boxed in the Holy Spirit and made it into a very dead, religious practice instead of a living faith. And so he claimed that, the Holy Spirit was on the loose and, ready to start a revival. And, he had never gone to seminary. I think he kind of probably had some sort of, angst against sort of the establishment. And it was very hip with the times. I mean, this was happening all over the place, little churches were springing up. And so he just got in on that. And, and he was a very charismatic personality, and he was able to draw a lot of people to himself and to his preaching. And so that's how it all began.
What's interesting to me about that, when I hear the things that your grandfather was dissatisfied about in the church, is that those are, one, somewhat legitimate, and things that I hear people my age being dissatisfied with as well. But what that usually leads us to is a more free, a less structured, or what those people want is a more free, less structured form of church. Whereas it led your grandfather to, in a lot of ways, a more structured and very militant form of church and Christianity.
It does, and I think it's very similar, though. Like, it started off very, very free form and very open and very like just all about the Holy Spirit. And people were, getting saved on the beach and getting baptized that very day in the ocean. And then, it was all these young people hanging out. So yes, it did start off like that, centered by his Bible studies and worship times. But I think what happens is when a new movement like this happens, even though people have these great noble intentions and they want something new and they want something different, human beings can't come together for a long period of time without organizing in some kind of way. And, there are healthier ways that this pans out, usually if there's multiplicity of perspectives and leadership, and there's not just one guy, leading the whole thing forward, and it's not all dependent on this one, charismatic personality. But there's a whole slew of them. And I mean, church plants pop up and fall down all the time because they're really, there's no solid structure. There's nothing stable other than, just an idea or this one person's idea of what church can look like. And, it's really unfortunate because people end up getting really hurt.
Do you think that in the beginning, your grandfather started with some sort of pure intentions, and then over time the power kind of consumed him and it turned into this thing that became very ugly? Or do you think that there was something sinister there in the motives all along?
I definitely 100% believe that there was something very good and something true at the beginning. And I don't think it was flawed from the beginning. In fact, I think that it could have gone on longer if accountability had been brought into place earlier on, and if the structure had been set up differently when it became clear that the way that we used to do things in the beginning didn't work on a larger scale or whatever. There was just so much. I think human beings have to have checks and balances, and when we don't, no matter how good our intentions are, something bad is going to happen, because we're human and we're prone to error and we're prone to sin, and our motives get all tangled up with our good intentions. And, it's like, hey, we just want to serve God, but oh my goodness, look, we can make money while we're doing this. Oh my goodness, this is awesome, And so pretty soon, just being on fire for Jesus, there's other things that get brought into it. And, I think that is really something that can relate to a lot of Christians everywhere. And I think it would be dangerous for people to assume like, oh, the assembly was just flawed from the beginning and it was only a matter of time before it fell apart, which is absolutely not true. And I would say most people who came into the assembly, especially in the beginning, had wonderful experiences. And it's something that I think American evangelical Christianity and Baptists and a lot of Christians right now who are so disenchanted with the church can see something very similar to their own experience in what happened in the assembly, because it's really not about it being flawed from the beginning.
That seems really important, because I think that a lot of us listening would think that, this story could never happen at my church or my denomination or something like that. But it's important to realize that these people too started out with good intentions, but the power, the prestige just got the best of them.
It can happen anywhere. And I think that is such a huge, one of the most important points I'm hoping comes across in the book to people, is that fundamentalism, and what I mean by that is a rigidity and a thing that's very power is controlled, and it's very much about the personalities and whatever. It can happen anywhere. It can happen, and we have this tendency, I think, like, well, we would never make the mistakes of the past because we've learned from, we're young and we don't care about that stuff anymore, and we have all these great ideas. The truth is, there's nothing new under the sun. Human beings are going to continue to make the same mistakes they've always made because we're human. We're still human. And if we want to do something different, then we have to set in place, I keep saying this, but the checks and balances to not only protect us from our own humanity, but to protect others from the slips that we are prone to make just by virtue of being human. My grandfather did some wonderful things, but at the same time, it was the pride and the inability to reach out for peer accountability, and then there was so much money coming in, and then pretty soon you're so in it that it's too late to redo the whole thing. I think it could have been redone, and that's what really the tragedy is that nothing was done.
One of the things that I was really curious about, you start out the book with a story about you as a little girl with your parents preaching on the streets. And you said that one of the things that you would do as a family is you would go to a new city, rent a house, and basically start a church there in a matter of days. And I'm really curious about the money aspect of that, because another thing that you said is that the pastors of these churches didn't get paid. And so I'm wondering where all the money came from. Obviously, to rent a house, it's a lot of money. And so how are they able to do that, to go to a new city, rent a house, start a new church, and all the expenses that come with that?
That's a good question. So there was never any salaried staff in the church. There were only a few, we call them full-time workers, and those were people that were given us in a salary, but it was never a set salary. It was basically just donations given through the tithes on Sunday, and it was all cash. So I always knew when things were going good, well, hey, I might get a new pair of shoes. But if things were not going good, we were we had to wait for things, and sometimes but the way that those missionary teams worked was anyone who wanted to go would contribute a sum to a pot, and out of that lump sum, we would pay for 6 weeks at a 6 weeks rental, and then everybody would eat all the meals together, and so that's how we worked. Everything was cash, and there was never any because we were relatively small at the time. We were able to do that, and everything was just always under the table. Every 2 weeks, my dad would go to my grandfather's house and pick up a big fat envelope of cash, and that's what we would live on. And we never had My parents never had a savings account or a retirement account or own their own home. We truly did. I guess the good part of that is that I did learn to just trust that God was going to take care of our needs. The bad side was I did not learn any prudent, financial saving. I just was like, hey, if we need something, God will provide. So that it was in some ways, it was a very free way to live because we didn't have any debts. We didn't owe anyone anything. We moved, and even though we lived within the same city, we moved a bunch of times when I was growing up, renting in different places. And, it was kind of a gypsy experience. There was a lot of fun things. I mean, we traveled all over the United States, so I got to see a lot of stuff. So there was this positive side to it, but also this really difficult side. I think it just added to my feeling of always being an outsider because, my parents didn't really have a real job and, so.
Well, and that brings up another interesting point too, because the way in which they dealt with money fed into the theology about end times. Because I guess when you think Jesus is definitely, absolutely coming back soon, there's no reason to save for the future, for retirement or for college or for things like that.
No, we really lived like that. I mean, and I think that was one thing, we really did live what we preached. And I mean, my parents especially, and there was some talk when the assembly ended and everything fell apart, there were a lot of people who felt like my parents had made out with all kinds of cash and money, and they didn't. They had nothing. I mean, they didn't even have a place to live. They had to stay in an apartment with someone, in the first couple of years after the assembly fell apart, because we really did we gave stuff away. I mean, we were always doing projects for people and, going down to Mexico and, giving, visiting the poor and orphans. And, so we really did live we really believed it. I mean, we really believed Jesus was coming very, very soon. And it kind of put everything else, and really nothing really mattered. I mean, I know this sounds weird, but I kind of almost missed that life because it just didn't worry. I mean, the only thing I worried about was, am I going to be, holy enough to get out of here in the rapture?
And you worried about that a great deal.
Oh, yes.
And you even developed these tics and kind of almost OCD tendencies that were manifestations of this worry and this anxiety that you had.
Yeah, that was not a positive. That really, that still affects me to this day. I've done some reading and stuff on brain trauma in children very young, and I do think that sort of my brain was sort of similar to, I don't know, a child from a war-torn area or something, because the amount of stress that I lived with on a daily basis, and then also just the constant physical punishment and the constant fear. I mean, I had a family member who went into the doctor and her adrenal glands were completely empty, that, and she's a little girl. And she's in my family. So that gives you an idea of the kind of stress that we were living in. I mean, I talked about that science experiment where my heart is beating, over 100 beats per minute. And that was just, that was my life. And it definitely, I had some very painful, OCD stuff going on for a while. So.
And so what are you afraid of at this point? You're afraid that basically the rapture is going to happen and you're not going to be taken as a part of God's children.
Yeah, that was
Right.
my fear. I was not afraid of the end of the world. I mean, I kind of wanted it to end. I was excited. This was what we believed. I was scared that I wasn't going to be holy enough or worthy enough to escape the great tribulation that we believed was coming. And I was afraid I wouldn't be good enough to be taken away at the rapture.
Now, I want to shift gears just a little bit because you brought up something important. When you tell one part of the book, your dad is walking you through basically the escape plan. So if the state, and that's, your dad refers a lot to the state, if the state comes and gets your parents as a part of the apocalypse, they want you to have an escape plan. And so he takes you to the park, and there's a hill in the park, and that's where you're supposed to meet so that they can send someone to get you once they've been taken. It's understandable how that could produce some anxiety, and also you're just a little girl. How are you, 6 or 7 years old?
I was 8 or 9. And, we had a secret family password, and we had, this meeting place. And it was very clear in my mind, like, if the Antichrist, and this was what we were planning for. If the rapture happened and we did not get taken, then we needed to have a plan for, the global takeover of the Antichrist. And so this was, if the Antichrist comes and arrests my parents for the faith, me and my sister are to run to this, this hill in this park. And this is where we're going to stay and wait it out. And dig from trash cans and survive. And, at that age, I just totally believed it. I mean, I was freaked out and worried, but it was like, well, at least I had a plan. Those poor worldly kids, their parents don't prepare them at all.
The thing that struck me the most, not the most, but one thing that struck me when I was reading that part of the book was your dad. I mean, there's obviously a bunch of crazy going on there, obviously. But also, I feel like your dad really loves you. I mean, even though this is crazy, he's doing it because he wants you to be safe. He wants you to be taken care of.
He is. And I'm really glad that came across, because I think what people need to understand, and especially in abusive systems, the people inside it are good people. And they have good hearts. They are being lied to. They are being led astray. And they're just trying to make do with the best to what they understand, to try, to the best of their knowledge, to prepare me for something that, he really, truly thought was going to happen. So, he did it because he loved me and he wanted me to be taken care of. And, and I knew that at the time. Looking back, I was like, man, that was insane. But, and I'm like, how could you do that to your children? How I would never do that to my children. But then I'm like, yeah, but I don't believe what he believed, So if I really, truly believe that, would I set up an escape plan for my kids? Probably.
Yeah. And then there's also other times where you look at it and you say, he, even in his world, in his mind, he's not being that loving towards you. And then that's where the more overtly abusive things came out. Can you talk a little bit about what those things look like?
Yeah. I think a lot of it was, he was raised by my grandfather, and my grandfather, even from the stories that go on in our family, I come from a family that it was very harsh and very my way or the highway, and very punishment oriented. And, I think that, what my dad did break a cycle in the sense that he never, I have one memory of him spanking me, I think what he missed with me was, he didn't have the love to give because he didn't have, wasn't given it himself. And, took me a really long time to forgive him. And, I did, but I also, the way that I can understand it and place it into context for myself is to say, hurt people hurt other people, and people who are not loved don't know how to give love. And he, and that's where a lot of that came from. I can only hope that he, at some point gets the healing that he needs, and I think he will, and I think he is. It just, unfortunately at the time he was very beholden to my grandfather. And so I became this threat because I kept questioning things and I kept wanting things outside of what was allowed for me. And especially in high school, I wanted to start writing, and I wanted to be on the newspaper, and I wanted to, take these journalism classes, and that just wasn't in the plan for my life. And so he had to be increasingly harsher and harsher with me to keep me in line. And that's what led to that.
I want to talk a little bit about this thing that you keep touching on, which is just their sincerity. It's funny, and I bet people outside of this that have no concept of this at all like to think about all of these people as just complete charlatans, complete fakes. Yeah. And it's funny, a month or so ago, there was this big Bill Nye Ken Ham debate. I don't know if you saw that.
I saw it.
Yeah, so Ken Ham's a huge creationist, and on Twitter, I was watching people's reaction, and a lot of them were saying, this Ken Ham, like he's just getting rich off of this. He doesn't believe a thing he's saying. He's just a complete fraud. I completely understand why people would think that, and I don't know Ken Ham, maybe he is, but a lot of us who grew up in the church are familiar with people who sincerely, deeply believe some of the crazy things that they believe.
Yes. And I think it was C.S. Lewis who talks about better to be ruled by robber barons than by someone who believes they know what's best for you. And yeah, I'm paraphrasing, but I think that the most dangerous kind of abuse happens through people who are very sincere in what they're doing and very sincere in their beliefs. I have no doubt that Ken Ham absolutely believes what he teaches. He believes it, and that's his context. He has to believe that, because if he doesn't, his whole theology falls apart. His brain cannot handle, and his faith probably couldn't handle. And I have nothing but compassion for him. I mean, I used to believe the same way. I think it's absolutely the same thing where, Christians can be the most sincere in their faith and in their beliefs. But we've seen in history over and over again that the most sincere people can be believing the most sincerely wrong things. And that can lead to so much pain and hurt and death. I mean, to make an extreme example, Hitler sincerely believed what he believed, and so the ends justified the means. And the assembly and these other abusive situations are on an obviously much smaller scale and not comparable. But the point being, the similarity is sincerity of belief is never. They can often say that, well, we're doing this for Jesus, as if that justifies doing things that harm other people. And you're seeing it in the news right now all over the place. All the stuff going on with Mark Driscoll, all the stuff going on with Bill Goddard and Doug Phillips resigning. These are men who, they sincerely want to serve Jesus Christ and build his church. And yet their methods, their ways of doing things hurt people and end up becoming manipulative, and there are lies involved, and you can't overlook that. I mean, scripture is so clear that it's not enough to just want to do things for God. You have to do things God's way. Like, I mean, in the Old Testament, when David wants to bring, the Ark of the Covenant into Jerusalem, and God strikes down two of the guys who touch it, because he's like, you can't just like pick up the ark and bring it over. Like, there was a way to do something. It was this big noble thing that David wanted to do, but you can't just rush out there and do it your own way. And the means are the ends. It doesn't justify. Sorry, I can go on. I could preach message on that.
No, I think that's well said. And I think we tend to, a lot of times we separate the theology from the method, but truly the method is the theology.
Yes. And I think that's so huge. I want people to, when they read my book, to understand, like, it's not about what our theology was. Like, it was about the systems and the structures and the methods and the ways that we practiced, which are just as important. I mean, and scripture tells us, I mean, you can't, just because you're speaking the truth, if you're doing it without love, like, the way that you do it is just as important as the message itself. And I think it's when churches are either starting a new church or wanting to, do some great thing for God, you have to be so careful about the way that you do it as well, because that's just as important.
So let's get back to your story. What I'm so curious about is what you think it was inside of you that caused the doubt about your family's theology, because your father's obviously been raised in this, and he never doubts, at least in a meaningful sense that causes him to ask the questions that you ask that get you in trouble. And one would assume that there are tons of other people who grew up in the movement or were growing up who didn't question it, who grew up to be their parents or your parents, you know. What do you think was about you? You talk a little bit about an inciting incident where when you think the rapture happens, where there's a tiny crack in the theology that forms. Was it that experience, or is there something else about you that made you start doubting that?
Wow, no one has ever asked me that question. That's a good one. I think God created me with a very sensitive spirit. And I've always been very, very curious, very, like I can tell when someone's not telling me the truth. And I can feel, I feel like my experience of life is I feel things very deeply. And also because I had been punished so much, I kind of was on this edge of like, I don't care what it takes. Like I have nothing to lose, you know? And so I had this sort of reckless courage to just like keep pushing forward and a very strong survival instinct. And so I just wanted truth. Like I remember just being like a little spy and like sneakily going through my dad's papers in his office to like figure out what was going on. Like I knew there were things going on that I wasn't being given the whole story on. And I would talk to people and I would make little phone calls and like pretend to be a different person and like talk in different accents. I mean, because I was so driven to find out what it really was. If this isn't it, then what is true? Like that always drove me. And to this day, it drives me. And I have always wanted to live a very authentic life. And if it wasn't real, then I didn't want it. I would rather just live without anything than live a lie. And I think in some ways that's a good thing of living at the end of the world, because a lot of things just get put in perspective. You just don't care about the stuff that normal, healthy people care about. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying it's probably because I'm mentally ill. But people ask me all the time, how come you don't care what that person thinks about you? How come you don't care? Like people leave all these nasty comments in your blog. It's like, well, I care. I mean, I feel it, but I don't. It's not enough to make me stop. I want to just dive straight down and to figure out what the root of it is. And I'm not going to stop until I find it. And so I think that kept me alive, honestly. But I did not leave soon enough. I knew for such a long time that things were bad and things were going badly, but I was so scared and I had been beaten so much that I didn't know how to live any different. So it wasn't like I was this brave, huge person who like went out and changed the world immediately. Like I left several times and came back and left and came back. And, you know, thank God I finally did get out.
So as you get older, one thing, you get to go to a public high school, which is kind of shocking to me that you're in the environment that you grew up in, that you're allowed to do that. Now, part of that you say is kind of the long con by your dad to start a Bible study at the public school.
Yes.
And so that he can come and basically preach at that Bible study.
Yes.
Because it'll be like shooting fish in a barrel with those high school students. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, it wasn't about like, you know, me being allowed to experience life. It was about recruiting more souls for Jesus before the end of the world. So, and, you know, fresh recruits, like unwitting teenagers. So, that's why I went, and I was, you know, equipped with nothing but my massive King James Bible and modest clothing, and that was going to win people for Christ. Yeah, for sure.
Well, I found it interesting that, and are you in Southern California at this time? Is that where you were? Okay. Yeah. So, and you go to high school and, you know, you're still in the middle, you're in the midst of Christendom. This is like early 90s, mid 90s.
Yeah.
And you come to realize like, most people here are Christians, and you see like the most popular group on campus is this Christian club.
Huge. Like it has hundreds of people, and they have a Wednesday Bible study, Christian club. Then they have a Friday, like praise day. And I'm like, what? Orange County is like a very conservative area I mean, it wasn't like I was being thrown into the bowels of, godless liberalism.
Yeah, but that's what you expected though, right?
Oh, totally. So I was very shocked. And here I was ready to convert all these people. I was expecting persecution and pushback. And instead people were like, hey, come to the club and hey, let's be friends. It was, and they were devout. Like some of them were more devout than I was. And, I mean, to the point where they ate certain ways. I had a lot of very devout Jewish friends, several devout Jewish friends, and they ate kosher and they didn't go to school on certain days, and I couldn't believe that they followed their religion, to the point of not eating certain foods.
Yeah. So it's in that time that you're kind of romanced by the non-cult life, you you see that they're not heathens, that they're good people, and then you kind of in a lot of ways become a regular high school student at high school. So you join the swim team and these other clubs and things like that, and you get really good grades and your teachers like you.
Yeah.
And you discover boys at some point. And you hatch this plan to get into a good college somewhere else so that you can escape the family and the church.
Mm-hmm.
What was the plan?
Mm-hmm. So I was trying to figure out a way that I could, please both my dad and then also kind of get out and have my own life. And I thought, well, if I get good grades, then I could be accepted to a college far away from here. And that was my plan. My end game was to get out. It was to get out of the assembly. I wasn't going to let them know, let my parents know that, of course. But I did. I really just tried to be very normal. I tried to be a normal American teenager, which meant I really had to observe people and see how they acted, how they talked, how they interacted with each other, and just mimic it and copy it. And a lot of my friends were doing really well in school and were planning to go away to college. So I just kind of mimicked their plan and was hoping that was going to get me out.
And so you're kind of living a double life because you've got to live piously enough to please your father and yet normal enough to fit in high school.
Yeah, it was, oh my gosh, it was so exhausting. It was so exhausting.
I want to talk a little bit about the relationship with you and your mother and your father at this point, because it seems like a lot of times your mother is much more understanding, merciful, but yet can't stand up to your father at any point. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, she stood up to him in her own way, but never in front of me. And never, I think what she would get from me is sort of side benefit, never what I really wanted, but she could soften the blow, and my dad was nope, this is what you're doing, because, he was getting his orders from George, and this is my grandfather, and this is what, our family is doing. And so, the best my mom could do was sort of try to couch the pain in some sort of pain reliever, but not ever fix the real problem, which was, I really just wanted to be myself. I wanted to live. And, so it was well, you have to be dead, but here's at least a little bit, of, here's
throw you a bone every once in a while.
Yeah.
You talk about how, your father would leave on these, missionary trips for weeks at a time, and your mom would stay at home, and she kind of became a different person when your dad was away.
She did. Yeah, she totally did.
You paint such a great picture of when reading this book, I come to realize that, not only are you being oppressed and suppressed by your father, but your mom really is too. That she really feels some pressure too. Maybe not as great as you, but just a lot of pressure.
And it was interesting because she was actually able to, to make a good life for herself, even in this environment. I mean, she was one of the few women who actually worked because she worked at the church I mean, she was the teacher, she was the principal. So she, got to pursue something that was already her natural, talent, was to be a teacher and an art teacher. And she was very artistic. And, so she got to have this outlet. But at the same time, it was still just within this very narrowly prescribed, way of life. And, when my dad was gone, it was like we could all just be like, just breathe a little bit. And I would hang out with my friends a little more. And my mom would go out and play racquetball with her, with her friends. And it was like we would have this breathing room. And then when my dad got home, it was like, okay, yeah, everybody like rein in and, get rid of all the music you were listening to and put on your modest clothes again, and like no hanging out with friends.
And then at one point, your plan to go off to college is squashed because you've been invited to be a part of the school newspaper. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so, and your thought is, I've got to do this because I'll need this on my transcript to get into a good college.
Right.
It's like one day after school a week for an hour or something like that. And your dad puts his foot down. And I think you did a really good job in this too, because you show the difference between like your mother really wants you to get good grades. Mm-hmm. Your dad doesn't care so much. He really just wants you to be faithful to the assembly. I don't think I've said this, but the name of the church cult is called the Assembly. He wants you to be faithful to that, to be at the morning Bible readings and Bible studies and stuff like that, and to do the chores around the house. We haven't even gone into the fact that your home is basically a commune at this point. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I just asked like 50 questions in that ramble, but let's start with the commune. What did your home look like?
Are you going to make me give away my whole book in this interview?
No. I promise this is only the tip of the iceberg here for all the readers. Go buy this book.
The commune. Yeah, it was, it was called a training home, and our church had training homes for men and for women. And so ours was a sister's home. And, we had, everything was very regimented. We had we didn't call them chores. We called them stewardships, because that was more spiritual and holy. And we all were on the same schedule. We got up for devotions every morning. We called them devotions, the scripture readings at 6:30 a.m. And then we all had breakfast together and, talked about our day. Everybody had, the purpose was to train people for, intense missionary service for Jesus. And, most people didn't become missionaries. Most of the women ended up just getting married and moving out. But, it was essentially like living in it was a communal home. And so we always had like 6 to 10 people living with us at all times for my whole entire life.
And so part of what your dad was concerned about was that you're falling behind on your stewardships, and you were missing some of the Bible studies together. And so that he had to put a stop to these extracurricular activities at school.
Absolutely, because if anybody else in our home had been, slacking off like I was, they would have been kicked out. So he couldn't kick me out, but, what he could do was put his foot down and cut. And also it looked bad on our family, like the image was, this family is 100% sold out for God, and all we care about is service to God. Well, except for this little like renegade 14-year-old Elizabeth or 16-year-old Elizabeth, who apparently is off on her own doing whatever she wants. So, I mean, there was none of that was going to happen. So, it was, you put the kibosh on anything that would interfere with, and really the only reason why I was on the swim team, why they allowed me to be on the swim team, was because it would fulfill my PE requirement. And when I stayed on for an extra year after that, because I liked it so much, and I thought, oh, this is going to be another way for me to like get into college and be a good, I could even maybe get a scholarship. That was also eventually like, no, you're not going to do that. So
I think I'm really curious to know what you think of God at that point. Are you saying, look, I know there's a God, but this representation of him cannot be it? Or are you saying, I don't care either way. This life is so miserable. I can't live it. If we were to go back and talk to 16-year-old Elizabeth, what would you, if you could honestly speak about it, what would you say about God at that point?
I was afraid of God. I mean, I really thought my concept of God was that he was just waiting with a mallet over his head to like bop me down anytime I got out of line. And I just thought he was this mean killjoy that was determined to ruin my life. Um, and at the same time, I was desperate to like stay in that God's good favor so that I wouldn't be sent to hell or like lose my, just in case the world is ending, like, and I still needed to kind of be on good terms with God, so it was this whole, like, again, the double life, like, oh, I've got to like do this part over here. And then I've got to live like this over here. And then I still got to try and get myself into college. And, it was just so overwhelming and so exhausting. And pretty much my concept of God was that he was mean and I was exhausted all the time. And at the same time, I just wanted to go like make out with boys in the gym, I'm like, well, how can I work all this together? Because I'm really horny and I can't handle this.
Yeah, so, you're a teenager. Yeah.
I was.
So I think here, Elizabeth, this is what's so fascinating to me. And if I could only ask you one question, it would have been this. This book could have so easily been about, here was my horrible life, and this is why church, period, is awful, and why God is awful, and why I'm an atheist right now. Like this book could have totally been that book.
Yes.
But it's not. So I'm curious why, was it ever an option for you to leave not only any church completely, but God completely, to stop believing in God at all? Was that a thought that you ever entertained?
Mm-hmm. Yes. After we left the church when I was 25, I call it, I went through my experimental atheist phase, where I was an atheist, and it lasted for about a week. It turns out I wasn't very good at being an atheist. I just couldn't, I found that I could not believe. Like I believed whether or not I wanted to, it was there. It was there inside me. And I didn't know what God was. I had to completely rebuild an understanding of God, but I knew that God was real. And so that was just a starting point. I was like, well, okay, I have to strip everything else away. And I just started there. And also I think, we've talked a lot about how hard I've worked my whole life, like to survive and to try and like please these people over here and please these people over here. And then like in a little bit in there, like try and squeeze in a little bit of something for Elizabeth, and being God. I mean, really, it was playing God, like thinking I could control everything. And if I just worked hard and tried hard enough, I could. And it's just an exhausting way to live. And I got so burned out. I mean, I felt like I was 45 by the time I was 20. I mean, I had people tell that to me. They'd be like, man, you just act like you're an old lady. And I look at some of those pictures from when I'm like 20 and 21, and I look at the pictures of myself now, I'm like, I see what they're saying. Like I just looked aged and exhausted. And, the reason why I think I didn't want to be an atheist was it was too much work. And it was too much.
It's hard to not believe in God.
It was hard not to believe in God. It would take more faith for me to not believe in God than to just start over and also, I touch upon this in the book, and I probably have to flesh it out probably in book 2, but, I adopted some very unhealthy coping mechanisms, compulsive masturbation. I mean, I could not stop that. And it was insane. Like it just took over my life because drinking wasn't an option and drugs weren't an option. And, we didn't have access to porn really, because this was like before the internet. And so, but I had fantasies and I had like compulsive masturbation, and I was addicted. Like, and it was my first experience of like something that was stronger than me that I could not overcome on my own. And, realizing like I needed, and also like, it was like really starting to inhibit my ability to like enjoy my life. And I needed help. Like that's just really what it was. And my brain was so traumatized from being in this cult. I've been beaten so much. And then I had this like to me, it was horribly shameful. Like now I can say it no problem. But at the time I felt like it was this horrible secret. Like I actually, the first time, like I thought I had invented this secret sin that nobody knew about. I was like, what is this like pot of gold that makes me feel so good?
Oh my gosh.
Nobody talks about like, yeah, that's good times.
I think I've done like almost 40 interviews now, and I think that's probably the funniest thing anybody said on this show.
I mean, a good little Christian girl, you know, like that was like the sin. And
well, when you can't when in the assembly you're not allowed to hold a hand of someone,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, you can imagine how bad that would feel.
And also how awesome. I was like, thank you, God. Like someone was like, well, why could masturbation be wrong? I'm like, it can't. I mean, God made our hands to be able to reach there. Like,
oh my gosh.
This interview has gone a whole other direction.
Well, yeah, this would be the first podcast where I have to like click the bubble that says like the parental advisory notice before it. Okay. So
you know what? Like it used to be such a source of shame for me, and it's so great because I think what I would come to realize is like I'm not the only one. Like I know I'm not the only one who's struggled with that, and especially for Christians. Like there's so much shame surrounding sex and our sexuality and our expression of it, and like if we can just say it and talk about it, like it's the first step I think to getting better.
Do you think, looking back, could you see other tics and psychological things like that other people were doing as well, even in your parents, maybe?
You mean, did I catch other people masturbating?
No, I don't want to know those stories specifically. I'm just thinking, because you talk about, you mentioned the masturbation thing, but also just the more innocuous things, like you're rubbing your mom's scarf through your fingers.
Totally. And like I would lock and unlock doors and like, open and close cupboards a certain way to like make things like it was weird. We had a few interesting souls who came through our home, and at the time we would just like write it off like, oh well, she just really loves the Lord. Like no, she had something else going on, and fasting and praying for days, like a very harsh sort of like asceticism, and like purging herself with like lemon juice and cayenne pepper, like and so as and that was her coping mechanism, to deal with the stress of living in that environment. At the time I didn't recognize what it was, but that's what it was. And there are a lot of people who just ended up getting sick a lot, and their immune systems were destroyed because the pace of life that we kept up was so frantic and so busy all the time. Like, Wednesday night Bible study, Thursday night prayer meeting, Sundays all day. I mean, we were there for 3 hours in the morning and, outreach in the middle of the day, and then 2 more hours in the evening, like preaching meetings, and then once a month all nights of prayer. And then on top of that, all your duties at home that you had to do. And then you were supposed to also be like discipling, people as well. So, people just like their health broke down and, got old before their time.
Yeah. Going back to the, why you didn't leave God completely and that sort of thing, I have a theory about people that have gone through things like you, and even to less dramatic extents, that and because you had mentioned before, you think that at the beginning that it started as something pure with good intentions, and they really wanted to follow Jesus. And I wonder sometimes if the reason you couldn't leave it is because although it had been so perverted and messed up, that there was just a kernel of like some real Jesus in there, that Jesus was trying to break through, and you were exposed to that something real, and that's what you were not able to leave to this day. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that I had enough. I would have these little experiences with a higher power, and it was enough to keep me to stay. And I would just constantly be chasing that experience, trying to replicate it or find it again. I think I talk about like I would experience like the Jesus sigh, like just a relief feeling of like, oh, everything's going to be okay. And, it kind of made a religious addict out of me, I hate to say, because I began to like, it was that's what I began to chase, was that feeling. And I wanted to always feel okay. And so it was, and then plus I did have a few friendships in there that were meaningful. And so it was enough to keep, to make me stay. I think people don't leave those situations until staying is just far more painful than leaving. And, eventually it just did get to that point for me. I mean, I think I would have committed suicide by now. I was that close. Like, it was out of my control eventually. Like, I would hit these downward spirals. And I talked about it in there, like, I would start having these panic attacks, and those were happening in the church. And like, one time I ended up in the ER, and I write about that, like, after this breakup with this secret boyfriend. Like, those things started happening to me more and more. I didn't know what was going on. I'm 100% convinced that I would have probably taken my own life if I hadn't gotten out.
I wanted to skip to later on in your life, and you've graduated high school. You're going to college, but in the town that you grew up in, so you're still living at home.
Right.
I thought, when I was reading it, I really thought that you would have maybe just after high school just left somehow, or get enough college under your belt that you could get a job somewhere else across the country or far away. But you don't. And so I guess my question is, what made you feel like you couldn't leave at that point?
Well, that's because I had met Matt by that point. And, I was starting to fall in love with him, and it was clear that he wasn't leaving. And I didn't want to leave. Eventually, he was enough to make me stay. And, I had hoped that he would begin to see through things, and if I just stuck it out long enough, that he would start seeing the things that I saw. And so I stayed because of love. I mean, women, I think in these situations, they stay because of relationship. Either they have a child, or they have a loved one, or something. And we make these decisions that like end up hurting ourselves, but we stay for the sake of other people. And that is why I stayed. I stayed because I didn't want to lose Matt.
And before Matt, there were some other boys along the way, and one even from inside the assembly. And those are some of the most interesting chapters. People should read those. When does Matt come on the scene for you?
He entered the church. I was a freshman in high school, and he was a senior in high school when he entered, but we didn't really become close until after that breakup with Nathaniel. That's not a real name. That's a pseudonym. But after that happened, and that was on the heels right after my breaking up with the other boy. I think that for me, the search for love was what drove me. I said that earlier, but like I thought that love would be the truest thing. And so I think that like that was, so we got really close my senior year of high school. And that was right after, the breakup with Nathaniel. I pretty much just went straight from Nathaniel to Matt, and just like transferred all of my, which FYI is not a good, smart, healthy thing to do.
Transference.
Just rebound straight into another relationship. I was just terrified of like not having love, and being alone. Being alone was the worst possible thing I could imagine. Even worse than being in the assembly my whole life. That was just the age I was at. So that's why I stayed for him.
So I'm curious what drew Matt to the assembly.
Yeah, that's a good question, because he, I think, had already been primed to sort of enter our church, because he grew up in a very similar environment. I had talked about like a lot of these little churches were sprouting up at the time of like the Jesus movement, and he and his family were involved in a very similar church that had started right around the same time as my grandfather's church, and were actually like these competing cults on the college campus, like competing with each other for like new recruits and stuff. So like when his dad found out that he was dating, courting the granddaughter of the founder of my church, it was like, what? You betrayed like our sides. His family had left that church when he was in middle school. So when he came to our church, a friend had brought him to a Bible study. He was like, hey, I remember this. Like, it seemed normal to him.
So I'll fast forward more. You eventually find out some pretty awful things about what goes on behind the scenes at the assembly and the leadership and that kind of stuff. And you and Matt decide to confront your grandparents, or the leaders of the church. What was crazy to me is that even at that point, you were saying, if they don't come clean, and tell me if I get this wrong, but if they don't come clean, we're leaving the assembly. I'm surprised that you're even giving them that much, that even if they did come clean, that it sounds like you were going to try to work it out, try to stay. No.
I know. I think that's part of what I've been conditioned to do. Like, you just stay, you work things out. People ask me that all the time too about my marriage. Like, how did you guys stay together? Like, people kept saying to me in the book, like, I kept waiting for you guys to break up. And, it's interesting because I feel like that's our culture too, is a lot like people don't expect people to stay together. And, it was the good and the bad of the assembly where like it was awful, but you just stayed and worked things out. And, I do know in my heart of hearts that like I wouldn't be able to live with myself if I didn't try every single thing, and that's why we think we did end up staying so long in the assembly, was like, I wanted to give them every last benefit of the doubt. I wanted to make was there any way we could save this ship from sinking? Was there any way that we could bring in other people? Could we I think I'm kind of a hopeless romantic in that sense where I'm like, hey, we could still make it work. I mean, even though it's like just obviously dead and like awful, I still like hold on to this relentless hope. And, in some ways that ended up not being great for me. My therapist said to me, she's like, Elizabeth, actually what this shows is that you have a high tolerance for abuse. And that's true. Like I had to realize like, oh, wow, okay, me staying here, I stay in harmful situations way too long. I stay in the burning building until I'm getting burned. That's not healthy. I've learned that. And I'm still learning that. But I also there's one thing that was always so hard for me, and this is kind of skipping ahead, but it was so hard for me about adjusting to mainstream American culture is like, I hate how disposable relationships and people are. I can't handle when people be like, hey, I'll call you, and like they never did, or we're gonna hang out and they never followed up, or like you would talk to someone for months and then once your play group was over, they disappeared from your life, and you would call and it was just like people just dropped things, like put new out, put new friendships on, like new outfits. I didn't get that. And I'm just not that person. Like, and I had seen so many people leave the assembly too. And I think it's probably also part of my abandonment complex where like I had seen so many people leave that I didn't want to be a person who left, Yeah. I wanted to be the person that stayed. I want to be the person who kept trying. And, yeah.
I would assume too that once those people left that they were, talked about disparagingly after they left. And I could imagine you imagining your parents, imagining other leaders saying those things about you if you left.
Totally. And I knew what the script would be, and I knew like I would be disowned. And even if I came back, I would always be considered like damaged, and I would never truly be trusted again. And, it was also really painful for me because as a little girl, before I knew what was going on behind the scenes, people that I had gotten really close to would just one day disappear and like wouldn't be at the meeting, or like I'd come home and like someone who had been living with us for 3 years that I'd gotten attached to, suddenly their stuff was all gone. And there was no, like, I was never allowed to talk about them. I was never allowed to talk to them. I could never see them again. And like, that was horrifying. It was, because we lived so tightly knit, it was like losing a sister or a brother, like to just, and then you never get to talk to them again. And I never wanted, even though like, and I didn't want to do it to my sister either, my own blood sister. I didn't want to like leave her behind. And, that's why you end up staying. Like I've talked to people who are like stuck in these situations and they're like, well, how come they don't just get out? I'm like, you don't understand. Yeah. Like, you're asking someone to give up their entire life for what? Honestly, there's no substitute in the outside world. It takes a lot of time to rebuild. So,
when you the part of the book where it's after you've left. It's kind of like those movies where like somebody in the 40s is like cryogenically frozen and then they're unfrozen in modern time and they have to learn how to like live a modern life, you know?
Oh, totally.
You talk about like you did such a great job with this, Elizabeth, because I love that you really very clearly show that in one way, for a very little bit, you left one prison for another. And that you leave this controlling atmosphere, and then you talk about you buy a TV and you're watching like TV for the first time in the commercials, and how you for the first time you realize like we don't have a front facing washer. I think we need a front facing washer, and like. And when you were with the assembly, like you never wanted for any of those things because you never saw them.
Didn't care, right?
And about you really like dove in head first into that, like
it was awful. Oh, it was awful. Just like take a fundamentalist and throw her into like American culture, and she's just like prime bait for every like reality TV show. I mean, I go to bed sobbing at night after watching The Bachelor, and I would get all incensed about like I was convinced for a while that there was this show on PBS for the kids called Dragon Tales or something. And I was convinced that these dragons were like secret satanic messengers, like to my children. and then I would watch like these Diet Coke commercials, and I developed a very severe Diet Coke habit that like, because I wanted that life, I had no immunity to it. And it was such a roller coaster of like crash landing and trying to like figure my way out and how people talked and how they interacted. And it was mind boggling.
And you tell one of my favorite stories in there is that you tell a story about meeting someone who does network marketing. Yes. Can you just tell just a little bit about that story?
I was in this like home goods store, and I thought that this woman who started chatting me up was like wanted to be my friend. I was like, this is fantastic. Like in America, in the real world, like you don't have to like I can just like be myself and people want to be my friend. No, it turned out she wanted to, and she was like giving me free samples of stuff. And I'm like, this is the bomb. Like where have I landed? And then it turns out she wanted to like do a Tupperware, like some sort of like, home party with me. Yeah. And she was going to sell from my house. And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't have any friends to invite. But second of all, I had this just horrifying realization that like she was doing on a sort of businessy level what I had done inside the assembly for like sold Jesus, like try to be people's friends to get them to recruit them to the assembly, and she was trying to be my friend to get me to have a Tupperware party. It was a really horrifying like realization for me.
Because you're going through this thing where, and I think it's kind of hard. It's kind of hard for a lot of people to make friends in their late 20s and 30s. And so much more so when you've been cryogenically frozen for the last 50 years. And so there's this woman who's being very nice to you and gives her a business card and let's talk and and you're thinking like, wow, this is great. I've made a friend. And then she follows up to schedule a party at your house.
Totally. I mean, I was starved, and I think that, people who are coming out of these environments were very vulnerable and susceptible, and I hadn't quite yet figured out yet that I needed to process and heal before I was fit for any kind of like friendship, because I was just starved and needy and like couldn't, and I didn't, if someone tried to talk to me now, I would like brush them off, because I would know something else was up, but at the time I just fell right in for it.
So you begin to kind of try to chart out a new spiritual identity, and you and your husband and your family go to a mega church. And that doesn't really work out for you. And then you after that, and still to this day, have really found a home in the Catholic Church, which is interesting and kind of funny because in the beginning of the book, you quote your dad saying that those quote unquote those Catholic liberals have the most hardened hearts.
That's right.
So you're almost on the in his mind, you're at the opposite end of that spectrum of where you.
I've always been a disappointment to my father.
What is it about the Catholic Church that's attractive to you?
It's the systems and the structures. It's the way that it is set up, and it is the way that they operate that I find to be the most, in a very counterintuitive way, actually the most holistic way to do church, because there are checks and balances. There is no place for one personality to take center stage. The way that the Mass is set up does not feature what the priest is going to say. I mean, people don't go to Mass to hear the great homily that the priest is going to preach. They go because the Eucharist is the center of the Mass. That was such a switch for me, because in all the Protestant churches that I had gone to, the pastor's sermon is the center of the service, and everything leads up to that. And everything is centered around what great word from on high is he going to bring to us. And, it really kind of takes the human ego out of it. And the way that the Mass is organized is it's not about the human ego. It's about a corporate, expression of an act of worship to God and Jesus coming to us in the Eucharist. And for me, that was such a different switch, because it meant that I would be safe from some guy thinking God had just spoken to him a word of revelation that next week, LA was going to get hit by a nuclear attack and we all needed to, pack up our families and flee to the hills. That's not going to happen in Mass. And then there's another thing, there's reverence. I used to think that Catholics didn't read their Bibles, but we have 3 readings in Mass, and we read more scripture in Mass. I was shocked to discover that you'll hear more scripture in one Mass than you will hear in one sermon. I mean, and within the course of 2 years, we read through the whole Bible. So it was all these sort of shocking things that I had misunderstood. And then when I started going to Mass, the experience of it was so soothing. It was so different. It wasn't culturally relevant either. I really liked that. It's not about an American expression of my Christianity and what do I like? Was the worship good? Is the band good? Do I like the band? Do I like do I feel something? It was not about me at all. And the thing is I know myself well enough to know that it had better not be about me, because it is going to all go to hell in a handbasket. And it's not about any one person either. And I just feel safe there, because it's not going to that stuff isn't going to happen. And it's been around for 2,000 years. It's not going anywhere. And yes, some people said to me well, how could you go there with all the abuses and the scandals that have gone on? And I'm that's a fantastic question. But the truth is, abuses and scandals happen every single place I went. They happen everywhere across the board of the human experience. Bring humans together and you're going to have scandals and abuses. But the way, the fact that what I've seen the church do is truly examine itself, and it's paid out settlements. It's paid out settlements to victims, and it's changed the way it does things to make it more safe. And that's huge to me. When I was in church, abuses were happening and nothing was being done. There's, and I also
not only that, but in the situation you're talking about, there was no other higher authority to appeal to.
Exactly. I love that. There's a hierarchy. Hierarchies are often used as a pejorative term, and, say oh, well, the hierarchy is to blame. Well, hierarchies are there to keep us safe. When they work well and they're, they keep the large number of people safe. And if you're not getting justice in here, you can go to your bishop and he can go, you can appeal up.
There's an accountability.
There is. Yeah.
Well, Elizabeth, it has been such a fascinating interview, and the book is so good, and you're such a good writer. It could be, even if you took out all the wonderful spiritual insights out of it, it could be a best-selling novel on its own, just the story in and of itself. So thank you for joining me today, and thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks again to Elizabeth. Remember, you can find all of her links to her blog, to Twitter, to Facebook, and link to her book on Amazon on the show notes of the show at seminarydropout.com. The book is Girl at the End of the World. All right, join us next week. That's right, next week for Seminary Dropout.